Welcome to Philosophical Tools. This is part one of a longer series of tutorials I hope to create that look at artists developing tools both from the past and the present, specifically focusing on media art tools. Today that's going to be the frame buffer, and we're going to look at quite a few works that relate to the subject, and then I'm going to share with you how to build a frame buffer in TouchDesigner as we go. In relationship to the frame buffer, I wanted to bring forth Edward Muybridge and Julius Murray, both photographers in the 1800s. I said 1980s, and we could change that real quick. 1890s, 80s. But what I really liked about these two artists, the fact that they built tools and processes for capturing time, and then they both chose how to organize those images. Muybridge decided to organize in a grid. Julius Murray organizes all in one frame, each allowing you to see a greater range of motion in a singular image. And you know, that one up that's particular, the horse in motion, was a bet that all hooves of a horse wasn't up and during a gallop, and they were able to see time in a very new way. And that time organization led to eventually the development of moving images. And I like showing that the photographic gun, 1982, which was kind of like a Gatling gun for shooting film. And what I kind of quickly jumping to the 1970s in video art, I have a short clip from Woody Vasulka, and what you see right now is a small a piece that's a part of that called Evolution, which is made by Stana and Woody Vasulka in 1969 or 70. And this piece directly relates to the aesthetics of Muybridge and Murray, but what's interesting is he's talking about the transition and the differences between video and film. And so let's hop in and see what...
It was obvious to me that film was vertical medium. Film strip went vertically through the camera, and it was projected vertically. But suddenly in video, I saw this horizontal movement.
Next up, we have an interview from Peer Bode. It's a short excerpt from a documentary I'm working on, Video Instruments, Artists and Toolmakers Past and Present. This is Peer Bode talking briefly about his collaboration with Dave Jones, working on a frame buffer that they are collaborating on a few new features. The interviews ran through original Dave Jones frame buffer, and the frame buffer was developed in 1974 to 77 in conjunction with the Experimental Television Center in Owego, New York.
The clip doesn't have to be, it's a video in and a clip in. And it can be, the video in can be the one that has the clip. And what is the clip doing? Right now we're not under computer control. The clip is turning on and off the memory. So what we're looking at in the image is live or frozen. You can adjust the clip as to where the gray level switching point is between the image being live and frozen, right? And that's the same image going into the video in and then into the clip. That already is, you know, you could just stop there. You have a philosophical tool. It's like the zoetrope. It's like any of those amazing machines in the 19th century.
Peer Bode goes on to make quite a few works with the frame buffer. Most notably is Camel with Window Memory, 1983, where we're at this interesting time where the analog signal is now able to digitize and save a frame, and Peer Bode is playing this game with the save frame and the liveness of video with the photograph of the camel. Let's take a look. Next up is one of Peer Bode's most notable pieces from that time period. This is Video Locomotion from 1978, which has a direct homage to Edward Muybridge. Well, it doesn't necessarily use the frame buffer directly, like with the last piece. Um, it does actually use the frame buffer for the still frames. Why am I including this piece? Because I think conceptually it's interesting to look back at how artists have thought about time in relationship to Muybridge's work, and this piece deals with that directly. Next up, we have an interview with Dave Jones, uh, the original creator, toolmaker, legendary toolmaker of the frame buffer. And like I said before, this was developed 1974 to 77 with UTC, Experimental Television Center.
The original concept was you grab an image, you hold it, and I loved keyers, and so I thought, well, what if I add a keyer to this? And now you can selectively store an image.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did that, it just changed the whole flavor of the thing. It was a completely different machine conceptually.
And that's when we start seeing all the layers.
And that's where you can leave, and especially once you start playing with time, even though it's a short period of time, you can build up a trail of images that goes back minutes, even though you're only looking at maybe half a second of time looping. Because what happened a second ago is in one part of the screen, what happened 2 seconds ago is in another part, what happened 5 seconds ago is in another part. And so that complex image could actually be showing you time winding back a long ways, but just a little bit of each of that period of time.
It's kind of amazing to hear Dave talk about building the frame buffer and seeing these things for the first time. Just by simply fact of adding a keyer, he was able to start to layer up those repetitions of time. And that's something that I then used, that concept that I used to develop Ritual and Repetition in 2018, where I used the frame buffer that I'm going to show that I made in TouchDesigner to construct these layers upon layers of movement from some live footage I shot in China. With all this in mind, and giving you some context, both historically and for my own example, we can go down and start to make a frame buffer. To get started, I have the web camera that we have in front of me. And if we're thinking about what Dave Jones was saying about a keyer, that's the kind of our first step. So we'll add a chroma key. And the chroma key, for those of you video, has the ability to cut color, right? But this is also where the what we would traditionally call the luma key is, and that's where we'll get started. Is we'll go to value, and val min cuts out the darks, and val max cuts out the lights. So for today's example, let's cut out the val max, and then I want to be able to layer that. So in hitting tab and going to tops, which is our video, which I quickly did with the chroma key, there is an amazing search thing here. So you can say, find the keyer or find anything that has to do with key, chroma key and RGB key. We want the operator over. So we'll add over. And I want to put over our signal flow to the top of over. And then I want some way to a feedback system that's going to store things. So to some extent, we'll have feedback. Now something that's interesting about feedback is it defaults is one, not to have a target top, which is what creates the loop. But it also, its default size is 128 by 128 pixels. A good way to automatically size it is to give a piece of footage that is the size that you want. You can additionally go to common and go to output resolution and say fit and say 1920 by 1080. Okay, so we have that part of the signal flow. And what that gives us with over is we have one layer, right? In some sense, that's getting towards a frame buffer. But we were starting to build this feedback system. And in the loop, we want the ability to save frames. So let's type in cache, so tab cache. And inside the cache, you have to do two things. There's an output index over here that needs to be negative. I normally just grab the slider and make it negative 127. And then the cache size, this is going to be the frame separation with the buffer, right? So how long time passes, and you can kind of see that between these two. So the over is going to be present time, and then you'll see a slight delay with the one on the right in the cache, and that specifically is 32 frame separation. Let's make it a little smaller so you can see that now there's 12 frame separation between over and cache. And then what I normally like to add when creating a frame buffer is switch. And why I like doing this is I can add a constant, or I can switch between what's coming in and black. So let's grab black, and I added a constant operator. I'm also going to go to common and make it 1920 by 1080. And the switch is the last part of the frame buffer that needs to go back to feedback. So feedback's looking for a target top, and you can select feedback and then click and drag switch into the target top. You should see an arrow with a plus, and drag and drop. So now we have a frame buffer that is the cache is what's controlling those layer separations. So if we go back to cache and go down to, let's say, 1, we get something pretty close to what Peer Bode was using up at the top in the demonstration. And then so let's increase that back to something 15 so we can see the layer separation. The cache can go up all the way to 128. This is where you're going to get a pause in your FPS. Well, not necessarily FPS, but the cache has to have those frames built up. And now you'll see every 128 frames, a new layer will start to pop in. So it'll take a little bit longer to build up a mass of these frames. And let's change that back to 15. And also notice that my most present self, right, the real-time self is not in the cache. That's back over here in the chroma. And if I wanted to add that on top to be the topmost layer, I would need to add a composite. So I can add composite and the switch. Now, the default mode for the operator for composite is multiply. We want to do on top. And that worked. Great. So if I look, I should see myself moving in real time with the layers behind myself. Okay. And you can do a few other things with this feedback system. In between, so the feedback loop starts at the over. So anything after over is adding into the feedback situation. So the feedback situation is going to have iterative implications in the system. The easiest thing to demo this is insert the operator. So we can insert transform. And the way I just did that is I right-clicked on the line that was connecting over and cache. And then you can say insert operator and then find the operator. So I inserted transform. And when you insert transform, let's actually make sure all of this is fit to resolution 1920 by 1080. And you might have to go to output aspect ratio and do a 16:9. Okay, there we go. You can kind of see what we're doing here. A little bit easier. So in transform, if you add this into the mix, you can do quite a few things. Play with scale. So if we go to scale and we move down below 1, every iteration will be pushed back into space. And the less you know, the quicker or the lower the scale goes towards 0, the quicker those iterations will move back into space. Now, if you don't have a lot of movement in the types of shots that you're using, you can use translate to offset these. So if I could move X, so I'm right-clicking on the parameter, and let's go down to the smallest decimal point movements, and let's just move X off to the right. So then you can see the layers as they build up a little bit easier if you move the translate. And you know, you can do the same thing with translate Y, so you can move those layers up and down accordingly. You could even do that in real time, perhaps, and have the layers move up and down to an audio oscillator, which would be amazing. Scale can also go obviously above 1, so all those layers are now going to come towards the quote-unquote camera. Let's change our translate back to 0 and 0. So each layer should start rising, and we can over-exaggerate that a little bit. Okay. Another fun thing to play with before we go, and that's essentially a good place to start playing with a frame buffer, is just something fun to do is in the signal flow, before or after the chroma. Let's do before just because I think it might be easier to see. Let's add edge, and edge is going to give us some white lines, and let's go to value and not cut out the white but cut out the black. So then we have this layering of drawing like lines on top of one another's in real time. So that's something that's kind of amazing to play with. That's what I encourage all of you to do is then try to add new things into the system. Adding it after over will be an iterative change. And if you'd like to turn off a certain thing that you added, you can just go to the arrow, and then that will turn off that process. So thanks for tuning in to the first philosophical tools. This was the frame buffer. Next one, I hope to talk about slit scans. Thanks.